I guess we have a long delay here for an equipment failure.
Yeah.
Also, at the most intense moment when you're a 5-5 with 10 seconds left, because we don't want to add any more excitement
Right.
to this.
Yeah. Iris working to stay warm and keep it going while dealing with that. Always really difficult if you need to.
No, that's absolutely true. One of the, in fact, one of the things that is really difficult as a competitor is when the other competitor has to take a break for gear, or because they slipped and they fell and they hurt themselves, or their sword broke, and you can kind of get out of your rhythm and out of your focus. And so it's good to be, as Iris is doing, you can see that she's trying to stay in there, trying to stay warm. That's the correct way to deal with that.
I will say I'm a big sports psychology nerd. Before anyone jumps at me in the chat, I'm not claiming to be a sports psychology expert. I'm a nerd. I like it. I dive into it, and something that I really like to see about big tournaments like this is seeing what I call the coping mechanisms, right? The people that need to amp themselves up and what they do to like get the energy, the people that need to slow down and what they do to keep themselves calm. And then the people who have no idea what's going on because this is their first rodeo, and they're just like, I call it the headless chicken. They're just walking around trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, that plays into what Ted and I were talking about earlier about this being the sportive element being kind of one of the unique element to it, is that a lot of your success in tournament is your mental preparation and how you deal with things, which is a skill in and of itself. It's something that, when you're sparring with your friends at the club, that's completely different than the stress you experience at a tournament.
That was a point.
Yeah, I think we've got the,
it's funny you say that. I was going through some of my books a couple of weeks ago, and Chilister, for those who don't, I assume everyone knows, that runs Wichtenauer. He one time told me that he hated that modern people, I'm going to get to a point, I promise. He hates that people don't write into their books anymore. Because the times that we found sources, like old sources, and there's little notes at the side, informs us a lot of how things were back there. And also like how people like apply their thoughts, and it just gives us more insight. So ever since he said that, I write in my HEMA books, and my manuals have like little annotations and like circles and so on and so forth. So I came across an old note of mine where a fencing manual said, for those, it was something around the lines of like, for those who are fearful and faint of heart, the fighting, like the fencing arts, is not for them.
Right.
And I circled that, and I was like, well, F you too, because I was very scared-ish when I started doing. He was like, I don't like this, and the reason I bring this long story is because I feel like the tournament pressure sort of like sometimes adds that little section of like the fear, and I don't mean it in a negative context. It's just it adds that emotional aspect that the masters talk so much about, like that fencing manuals talk about it, and like we don't want to go and like hurt each other and feel fear out of like, I don't, fencing with sharps, but we can emulate a little bit of that in the sense of like, these next action is gonna matter to what's gonna happen after, right? I'm in a double situation, I need to get it right to move on. I'm afraid to mess it up, and it allows you to like reframe those mental skills in a healthy way, so to speak, and like challenge that. And I like that emulation a lot. I think that's one of the reasons I like tournaments, is like I like that emulation of like what happens in this point of stress.
Yeah, social anxiety, performance anxiety. It is a good way to introduce stress into training, to try to encourage and develop stress inoculation. We see that in other martial arts or modern combatives. People are, you can't, you're never going to be able to, well, I'm not going to say never, but for the most part, you're not putting people in a life or death situation where they have to perform or die. So in order to get people inoculated to the stress of whatever it is that they're doing, you're trying to simulate other things. And while this is not a perfect one-for-one comparison, at least we're introducing some level of stress to make people try to overcome that in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Like when people first start sparring, they will naturally feel stress, but as they become used to that environment, it gets easy. They stop feeling that additional pressure. And while we certainly aren't going to put them in a true life or death situation, if we want to continue to have them be able to work under stressful environments, this is a way to do it. I think the key then becomes understanding that the stress from this, while it can be representative of that life or death kind of scenario, it is still a different form of stress. It's not the exact same thing. And I think sometimes, this goes back to the earlier conversation, making sure we're staying true of what we're talking about and what we expect to get out of it in the process.
I will also say it's interesting though, because in what people sometimes don't realize is that stress feels the same regardless of what's stressing you. And so when you are able to realize that, yes, it's different, but it's not that different.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk to that in in sociology and once again, sports psychology. I will also note on this whole conversation and getting into a little bit of the history buffs. Yet again, I find myself staring at the background to all of the Mordhau people with their sword and buckler practicing, and it looks a lot like the illustrations that you see, at the Saal, with all the actions happening in the background. People are this is what I picture that it was like swashing at the buckler on Sundays to help to desensitize some of those nerves and jitters, so whenever you get to the actual stress, you have a much better management of it, which I really like.
I like I said, I think tournament fighting, the sport of element, is it has a lot of unique things. There's some good overlap, and we can kind of think about the way we interact with stress as a potential tool for the possibility of having to manage stress in a martial art sort of situation. And again, I know there's a lot of people listening to this, and talking about HEMA in terms of a martial art is kind of cringe to some people, and it's sort of a taboo thing. But if you are sort of thinking about this from a standpoint of, if I were a 16th century fencer and I was wanting to think about this from a standpoint of, I'm going to go a little tangential here, but I understand that there's a lot of people who would have interacted with these sources who had never, ever got into an actual real life or death altercation. There were lots of people who interact with these sources purely from a sport, social pastime, but that's not to say that people never would have been thinking about this in terms of what even happens if I were to be in a situation where I'm relying on these skills to protect myself. And so that's where we start to see that, like we said, the Venn diagram of the overlap. We're trying to train to deal with stress in this controlled environment for the possibility of being able to better deal with stress if we were in an actual environment where our lives are at risk.
I kind of like this conversation because I'm on the opposite side of the spectrum. I am a HEMA sport team, kind of end of the line. But the funny thing to me is I think sometimes we put a lot of effort on oh my God. Hola, soy de Mexico. How do you say this? Differentiate. That's a hard word.
Differentiate, yeah.
It's a big word for me. I'm sorry. We put a lot of effort trying to find the differences, and there's so much similarities, right? When you look at stress testing for martial training and stress testing for high intensity sports or high level performance sports, sometimes they're not as different as we think that they might be. I think about it to me it's context, right? What is your context? What will you try to do? It's kind of when I teach fencing is we can look at this exchange as very martial warfare sound. We can look at this exchange as very social. Hey, actually murdering is illegal. So if your friend that is being a dum-dum with a sharp sword because he just got a little too many drinks, if you actually hurt them, the one that's going to be in trouble is going to be you, because medieval people and Renaissance people still had rules. So you need to learn how to approach that without actually hurting the other person
Yes,
or not hurting them too much. And when you put all those context, all of these plays have so much more in common than differences.
Yeah, and I mean, and here's the thing is that, there's a lot of really great scholars, including there's a couple here this weekend who've done a lot of really great research showing that the context to a lot of these sources was never intended to be performed. Well, I'm not going to say never, but it probably was not intended for the most part to be performed in with lethality, where we're actually going to be ending people's lives. But this is what I will say. I mean, we can look at some literature like martial ethic in early modern Germany, and we can see anecdotes of when people were employing swords in a civilian context and they were ending people's lives. And it depending on the context. Yeah, there could be very serious civil and legal consequences for that, and sometimes there were not. And let's just look at KDF. I mean, within the roughly 200 years or so that when the masters are writing these spec books, the Holy Roman Empire, and it's not one for one, it's not just a one singular political entity, but it's changing a lot. And so at any one period of time when any one of these fencing masters is writing, the kind of context to the audience that they are writing to could have been very different than another master, like say, for example, some of the later 16th century masters who are writing longsword. The audience that is going to be practicing longsword in that time is probably much different than some of the earlier 3227A practitioners, where it's a guy with his house book and he's just noting down advice and some commentary on the Zettel that would be most likely for his own personal use or for his family's use or his friends' use. So
I love that you point that out, because something that I love to talk about my students is how sometimes we have time blindness, because for us, like, it happened a long time ago. It kind of like gets meshed in the same pool. And you're right, because I remember the first time that it was noted to me that there are fencing masters who refer to previous fencing masters the same way that we refer to them, of like, I wish I had met them when they were alive. And like, I think this is what they were trying to say in their writings. And so HEMA masters doing HEMA is the most absolute like circle around in my head. It's just fascinating to me.
right. I think as modern practitioners, we're looking at fencing from anywhere from the 15th to 17th century, and we look at that and go, yeah, that's quite old. But you're right, even within the context of a generation, a fencing master who's only one generation later may have looked at previous masters as being outdated or old, or something that would be put on a pedestal, some sort of the pinnacle of the fencing that we're all trying to achieve. So
It used to be better in my old days.
right.
One of the things that was very fun for me to realize is a good friend of mine. It's really into Victorian self-defense and Victorian, tactics for the police. And we were looking at sources where they talk about how to use your coat as a form of not only as a defensive method, but like as an offensive method, right? There's this one page where it explains that if you have a burglar running and the policeman catches them, you will see the picture of the Victorian man holding the coat sort of like with his fingers over the shoulder. And the purpose of that is that if someone runs at you, you will use your heavy wool coat with like very metallic pins, and you will thwack the coat to their face. And then we see sources talking about fencing with cape and throwing the cape to your opponent in similar fashion. It's literally an evolution of cape fencing. It's what came in Victorian era, use of the coat. And yet again, it's like that reference of like how time and how like the knowledge passes in ways that we might not recognize. And that if we look at it it looks old, but it's like they play with each other in very interesting ways.
Yeah, and in some cases, I think that we see across different times and different places there are interesting similarities, but and even then, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is some knowledge of that other thing that is influencing it. Sometimes, for example, like the code thing is a great example. We look at Bartitsu and we've got all these sort of civilian ways in which we use our hat or our cane or our cloak or whatever to keep ourselves safe. But even in World War II, we have manuals on how to use your backpack and how to use your all these other items that you would have at your disposal to deal with someone with a bayonet, right? So I think regardless of the place or the time, people are always going to be thinking about what are the tools that I have available at me to keep myself safe. And again, this is what's interesting with HEMA is this is where it gets people get really there's this kind of false dichotomy when it comes to HEMA where you've got some people who want to think about everything from, oh, this is a martial art and is this martially valid and can I kill people with it? And then there's this other school which is like, this is a sport, this is a game, this is what people, and the truth is, like, there are contexts to where this is done purely for sport and in a controlled environment, and this is mostly practiced by people who do this as a hobby. But we also have to acknowledge, like, there is some evidence to suggest that there were times and places where people would have been potentially practicing this with the intention of possibly getting into armed conflict.
The phrase that we have in Mexico for this, for those who don't know, I'm Mexican. We call these "por qué no los dos?" Right? Why not both? And then that's like, I agree with you. I think there's a space for both, and I think bring it back to humans are humans through history. I just really find it very, very funny when we find ourselves as modern people having these debates of, like, for example, like the right way of HEMA, right? It's like, this is HEMA, this is not HEMA, this is correct fencing, this is not correct fencing. And for those of you who enjoy dabbing your toes in not just the manuals, but like literature regarding of fencing historically, the number of times you would find sources and people disagreeing with each other about approaches to a particular situation. If you read, I don't know, I'm going to give you one of my favorite, he's one of my least favorite people, but he's my favorite to use an example, known as George Silver, which if you read those sources, George Silver has nothing but complaints to give to everyone. And I would say that he's my favorite because he will let me know everything about the Italians out of how much he needs to say how he feels about the Italians. If you read George Silver and you think about him as a man with a computer and the internet, there's no difference. He said, we do the same thing that they did back then. It's like, my way is the correct way. And I must prove through everyone, through my 1,000-page essay. And a lot of the debates that we have right now are the same debates that they had, right? In terms of, like, so, yeah, it's so funny to me.
There's some. I mean, I think Silver's kind of an interesting example because Silver does talk about the context to fencing and why a certain style of fencing is important, because Silver brings up ideas like this Italianated. By the way, I love Silver because he came up with an adjective, Italianated. I mean, I don't know if he came up with it, but he uses it. It's funny. Anyway, he brings up this idea of, like, if these people are performing reckless, suicidal fencing, which really, and by the way, this is Silver speaking, not me, but if Silver's argument is, if we have a style of fencing which encourages people to be aggressive and to they're looking to mortally wound the opponent rather than trying to create space, be defensive, and always trying to fly out and back and then crossing and then trying to keep ourselves safe, then we're going to have a lot of young men who are going to die in foolish, stupid wars, or not even wars, but in battles. And It's interesting because when Silver's writing, like, this is around a time when we're actually starting to see some interesting early European nationalism. I'm not going to say it's the first time, but Silver literally writes about this idea of, like, this Italian style of fencing, you can't use this in war, where my style of fencing will still function in war. And then he says things like, if all these young men are dying in pointless duels doing Italian fencing, then they're not going to be able to participate in war. Now, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I mean, that's his. He thinks it's an objective problem if you don't have fighting age young age men alive because they're all dying in duels. And then, I think there's another, and I could be getting this wrong, but I'm almost certain there's also an excerpt where he talks about this idea that if two men who were both fencing under his system, his school of defense system, were to engage each other in a civilian duel, they would both stand waiting for the other one to make the error of stepping into measure incorrectly, and then neither of them would do it, and so they would eventually go, okay, this is stupid, we're gonna go home. So so you get this sense of, there were masters who were thinking about, like, why does this system exist? Why does this system exist in the context of people killing each other with swords?
Yes.
But we also see lots of evidence to show that there were people fencing and with no intention really of ever getting into a fight with a real sword. This was just purely a hobby. This was a sport. This was a game. And so when people nowadays deride people who only want to treat it like a sport, I think that's a mistake, because historically there were lots of people who really only did think about this as, you're a cobbler during the day. You're not a soldier. You're not a knight. You
had to go back home.
Right. This is just a fun hobby for you. Now we can pretend to be knights. Like that's one of the interesting things about like the KDS sources. There seems to be a lot of this like posturing, like, yes, we are knights and we're chivalrous, but in reality, you're probably not.
To be fair, my approach to this, I'm just a nerd with swords, so I just want to do all the things. But it's funny that you on that conversation, one of the things that I love to bring up to people, and speaking of, like, not everyone who engaged with swords ever thought or necessarily engaged with them with the concept of like warfare, right? One of the things that I love to bring up is the good old sport fencing right away system.
Yeah, sure.
That was the way that it was introduced to me, and this broke my brain. Is like, it was literally a system built, or like a rule set built for, oh no, I don't know how to sword fight, and I was challenged to a duel, and I need to learn how to not die in a short period of time. And so someone came up with this as a, hey, I'm gonna play this game with you, so you learn to prioritize the correct action. So hopefully within a couple months, you're not too, in too much trouble whenever you have to have your duel, because people will end up in duels without having previous knowledge of sword fight way later in time. And then you have people debating whether the right-of-way system was the correct system to teach you how to sword fight. And that happened while swords were still in active use in society. And now we find ourselves in earlier times, 2026, still discussing whether right-of-way was the correct way or not the correct way. It's teaching you the good. And it's so funny to me.
I agree. It's very interesting to hear that, because I am very academically ignorant when it comes to right-of-way. So like when people go, well, you don't understand right-of-way, I go, yeah, I don't. I actually don't know anything about the history of it or why it existed, and so I don't have strong opinions about right-of-way one way or the other. I've gone to tournaments where they do right-of-way, and I tell my students, if I went to a right-of-way tournament, I would probably do just as well as I would in another one.
Yeah, because and that's kind of like the thing, because when you fence well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? If you hit and you don't get hit,
correct,
the rule set doesn't. It's a very Mr. Miyagi thing. It's like, oh no, what's the rules? Like, just don't get hit. Get them and don't get hit, and then you're fine. And then the rules, it doesn't.
And it talks like, we're talking. Ted and I were talking earlier about this idea of like, you're going to see people in tournaments are going to have these weird behaviors and they're reckless, and I brought up to Ted. I was like, I actually, one of the things I tell my students is it's actually really good for you to go to a tournament and see weird things that you're unused to, because theoretically most of our fencing systems have anecdotes, or I'm not going to say, or advice or techniques that are supposed to deal with these buffles, the reckless, the bestial man. Like Silver, going back to Silver, has an absolutely fantastic anecdote or his piece of advice where he says, if someone wants to start like a school of defense or become a fencing master, then he proposes that there should be a test for them. And the test is you should have to fight 3 unexperienced fencers, 3 half-drunk men.
Yes, I know this one. And
3 fencing
defense masters. Yes.
And his advice is, if you're fencing the half-drunk men and the novice fencers, you should be able to strike them without being struck. And then against the fencing master, you should just be able to not get hit. And I think again, it's another interesting context where like we have someone who's talking about like to be a master against another master, it's not necessarily important that you can hit them. It's just, can you avoid being hit?
Yes.
But if we are in the context of like, I'm getting into a sword fight with a half drunk man, I should be able to hit him while be keeping myself safe. And so when we have these, I think now in when it comes to tournaments, a lot of times people will go, well, they blame this other fencer. It's the other fencer's fault that we don't.
Yes.
And sometimes, I mean, here's the thing. Sometimes doubles are unavoidable. And, you know, if you remember the old Dustin Reagan challenge.
Oh, absolutely. I can talk about that for days.
So, like, here's the thing. At the end of the day, there's lots of things you can do to sort of mitigate the risks that you take when you're fencing against someone who's really reckless. But ultimately, yeah, there are going to be times when what is it? Is it Gigante or Capofero? I think it's Capofero who describes the bestial man.
Yes.
And yeah, like this is something that the fencing master has to really worry about. Like this is something like is maybe possibly more dangerous and deadly than the other fencing master.
I love that you bring that up. Because I do talk about this in my class a lot, but the drunk, the newbie, and the master, we bring it up in my club all the time because it's like, you know, yeah, like your drunk person is a person that has like recklessness, no fear, and it's like the person that doesn't believe your feints or doesn't care about your feints,
Right.
or it's willing to run through your point and they're getting like all the bruise, and for them it's like, I didn't feel that. But the other thing that it's interesting to me, we were doing a program in my club where we were training people that, you know, to become coaches because we want to grow. And one of the things that we're recognizing with students, and I think it's you will agree with me that you have like you have these fencers, they came in and they start getting really good and they progress good and they fence with other people and they get better and better and better and better, and then they fence a beginner.
Oh yeah.
And they fall apart and they're like, I don't get it. And it's funny because we always talk about like when you're a beginner, fencing other beginners is easy, but when you become when you become more scholarly and you have to go back to that beginner, it puts you to a different text because they're not responding how you want them to respond. They don't process information the way that you respond information. And because they don't make the logic sense that you expect from another surf fighter.
Yes.
It tests not just your surf fighting skill, but also where you're able to learn to read your opponent, to convince trick your opponent into taking your baits. So I really like that. I really despise Silver for a lot of things. That's my favorite thing of him. Is like that's the one reason why I'm okay with him existing. Is just the little analogy right there.
I tell my students there's and this isn't perfect, but there's kind of 3 tiers of fencing. You're a novice fencer where you struggle to deal with experienced fencers. You get to be an intermediate fencer where you're now starting to be able to know how to deal with experienced fencers. And then once you become that intermediate fencer, you're now struggling to deal with the novice fencer. And then the very experienced fencer is like the person who knows how to deal with both. And what ends up happening, what I find is, as you're a new fencer and you're developing, you start to rely on like tricks. You don't necessarily understand the context to why things work. You're just doing things that you know work against the guys in your club or against other guys who are experienced good fencers. And what ends up happening is like if you're just a bag of tricks, when you fence someone who doesn't fall for tricks and who's reckless, that doesn't work anymore.
So that's one of the things. I'm gonna state this by saying like one of the things that I like about the variety of HEMA is how it gives you different rooms for experience different things. So I really like, for example, the tier A, B, C. I like how it isolates skill, but I also like the events where like everyone goes in and you in your single pool you have like a very good fencer and then you're a novice fencer, because it kind of puts you in that scenario, especially when you're intermediate. That's a really rough stage to hover at first. And it's just very interesting how that goes, right? Having your your fencer who's trying to make everything messy, and he works with one but not with the other one, and they're like, I don't get it.
Yeah, I remember one. I tell my fencers but if all I were to do is academically, hold my nose up and go, well, yeah, that only works because you're doing something dumb. They go, yeah, I don't care. I'm going to keep doing it because it works.
If it works, which like I think that when I picture what the what the life must have been back there, I'm pretty sure there was lots of people like that. It's like it works. I don't.
100%.
Why would I stop? Oh, that's so funny. Oh, we're getting to finals now. Sorry, I'm trying to listen to names because I got very excited all of a sudden.
No, yeah, I'm actually curious too.
But yeah, I will say it's actually funny. Just kind of like talking about the differences between like modern times and the full fun stuff is that we were talking earlier how if you are very intense in sport fencing, right? If you want to be like a medalist in sport fencing, they usually tell you not to cross train.
Mm-hmm.
It's like no, stay in your weapon because otherwise, when we used to do things that were not very smart, I went to an event that was called Fetch America.
Oh yeah.
And I had my first international tournament. I was the only Mexican. I was not the only Mexican, but like I was one of the few people that will travel outside back in the day. And my first match was against a gentleman called Dennis Longfist.
Oh yeah.
For those of you who do not know who Dennis is,
Dennis the Menace.
Dennis is one of the best fencers from back then up to now. There are fencers that have like their rising times and then they kind of like disappear or they get better and then they do not catch up to how, the fencing is progressive and they stagnate. These men has never not been great.
Yep.
I had no idea what hit me. I was standing there and then I was standing there with a boop on my head and then there was nothing left to hit. One of the best experiences in my life. Because it really informed where I wanted to get to.
Yeah.
I keep chasing getting to fence Dennis again. And every time that we're at the same event, I never get the opportunity. But now that it's been 15 years after, I want to see, can I get a point?
I 100%. I think the moments when I used to really regularly compete, when I would stagnate and not progress is when I was having success without much challenge. And it was only when I got absolutely demolished by a much better fencer that I would feel that hunger again to go back and train really hard and improve. And so, you'd absolutely, we need that. We need to be challenged. We need to be humbled sometimes as well.
I really like it. To me, it's like, it's the puzzle, right?
Yeah.
If I feel like I solved the puzzle, it's like, well, now I can look at it and it looks pretty and I will revisit it. But, having that like, oh, I'm missing a piece. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that because I sort of think of it the same way, which is I think of what are my holes in my game, what are my blind spots, what did I think that I was able to deal with, which I couldn't, and then I need to go back and really focus and address that back in training. And that's why I think Ted and I were talking. I was like, this is a good tool. The medals are fun. Everyone loves winning. Everyone loves prizes and they love their shiny medals. But if you think about this from the perspective of this is a way to stress test what you're doing, it's great for that. And I just sort of, I know this is almost, I don't want to get too tangential on this, but tournaments, going back to just brief on that martial art thing, one of the things I really don't like when people do is they say, I'm going to create a tournament to test how good of a martial artist you are. And I completely disagree with that. I think that everything, all these, I told Ted, I kind of think of HEMA in terms of there's this academic branch, there's this martial art branch, and there's a sport branch. And there is a Venn diagram where things overlap, but there's also some disconnect. And when it comes to the tournaments and sport fencing, like this, I'm not trying to see if I can murder you with a sharp sword. Yeah, we're just testing. We're just testing things, and that's it. And that's why it's interesting for this rule set. Historically, have you been to a lot of West Coast events before?
It's been a while. I've been to a few. There's some cross there, but not as much. I've never experienced a SoCal. I will say that.
Right. So like SoCal, Combat Con, the old P&W event, there used to be a lot of this emphasis on quality for act, right? So like the sword's got to bend so much and the
Yes.
sword's got to travel so far and you have to hit with so much force. And if it's too high up on the blade, it doesn't count. If it's too low on the blade, it doesn't count. I'm like, here's the thing. I'm old head. I love all that stuff. You know, like I'm 100%. I love that stuff. But Brittany and I, when we came up with this term, we fully recognize that the norm in HEMA is getting away from that. And people don't necessarily want to have very tight, strict sort of requirements for what qualifies for a good cut or not. And that's why we went to this direction, where it's, did it hit with the edge? Yes. Was there intent? Yes. Okay. It's a scoring action. And we've had a lot, it's funny this year, we had a lot of guys who are like from this region, old heads come up to me and go like, Kyle, I can't believe you would do this.
You know what's this is similar to me because we like, again, for the listeners, Kyle and I come from the same era. We literally come from the same era and different angles, and I'm the very opposite of that. I am the people that push the other side of the spectrum. And there was this one in the cutting tournament at Long Point. There was this one particular feat in which you will have your tatami at the center, and then you have 2 rods of wood at each side, and you had to be able to cut through it without the opportunity to be able to do the whole angle of rotation, right? And so I always think on the opposite is like, that's what I want. It's like, can you cut the whole tatami with very little room to move? Right. Which is kind of like where I come from. That is just really funny to me. But again, the way that I like to think about it, and going back to the puzzle and the medals, which for those who are curious, one of my favorite things to read about is what happens with Olympians who dream to get a gold medal at the Olympics and then they achieve it. And most of the time it's not great. A lot of the reasons why people will go gold medal and then disappear is because it's like, I work so hard and now I have a cookie. I don't know what to do with this. This is like, I did not went to all of these social activities for a little circle that looks pretty and everyone is going to forget in the next season of the sport, right? And that's very depressing. And so that's why when I'm like, people fighting for the medal is not necessarily it's fun and we all like to have a medal. Everyone like to like win and stuff. But when it's just that, it's very hollow. The way that I like to talk about in my class when we do an exercise is we will try something, right? I'm teaching a new move or new technique, whatever, and we will rotate. And I will say, let's rotate. If it didn't work with the person that you work with, you need to find, can I not do it? Does it not work? Or does it not work against this particular person? And so, did it work? Will it work against the next person? And it's the same thing with the medal. It's like, these work against these set of people these one time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Will it work again?
For sure.
Will it work under these different conditions? Which is, I also really enjoy coming to Cactus Cup with a completely different rule set to what I do here. Like, I come from everything is 1 point, right? Literally everything is 1 point. There's very little differentiations of target, except for like some way of negate scores. And then it's like, now you have deep targets, shallow targets, with like higher and lower score. That is not just because of the body placement, but also what you do, like the thrust and just like to be able to perform in both. Right. I can win in these conditions. Can I win against the other ones?
So this year, we got Claire and Piper. Piper is from my club. She's actually been working really, really hard on sword and buckler. In fact, at our club, we primarily work from Lignitzer and Cal and Tallhofer for sword and buckler, but she's actually been going through the Bolognese material like Marazzo and
nice
Manciolino. And so I've been very happy because she's been really working on her own stuff, and I've just been very impressed. So it's a good fight. Claire is much more experienced than Piper, though. Claire's been doing fencing for a very, very long time. She's extremely good.
I'm trying to figure it out. I kind of wish we could see the. Oh, hold on a minute. I can see the score and the timing. I just realized it's at the bottom of the screen.
I really like this match right here. Oh, see, like there's a really good back and forth where you see they're not overcommitting. One of the huge problems, and you'll know this. You'll respect this as a sword and buckler fighter. Sword and buckler has a problem where people like to crash.
Oh my God! Let me get started.
Yeah. So right now there's this really nice. They're testing. Right. They're not rushing in.
Nice.
Right. And she sees it. She takes it. Good cover. I like this. This is nice. This is good, clean fencing.
I really enjoy. As we're watching, I really like the Piper has these very smooth invitations, right? Yeah. Obvious enough, but not so big that you can't move after.
Nice hand hit. And that's right there is another thing. Actually, it was funny that hand hit happened. One of the things I talk to her about a lot is this idea. She likes to have that shield open. And I tell her a lot, unless the sword you're doing something with the sword in the shield, we want to try to keep that face of that buckler out.
Yeah.
Because then it does things. It leads to things like a cut to the outside of the hand. I
like to call it the happy cone of protection.
Yeah, and right. We look at DeGrassi and he shows us how the cone works. And so outside of the context of like, I'm intentionally placing those two things together with the intention of doing something. I really want to try to focus on keeping the face of that shield out to give me that cone.
One of the things I like to do in my intro classes is like, if you ever wonder why you had to go through geometry as a kid in school, it was always for sword fighting. It's about to make sense.
Right. So here's really interesting. I'm not sure what's going on. I think Ramon is the corner. I think he's probably talking to the director. Ramon is one of our senior instructors, and I think it's really interesting. I don't know exactly what the context is going on here, but I like the fact that it looks like Ramon's being proactive and he's engaging, because we really try to stress at our club is that we don't want the fencers to have to engage with the staff. Your corner should be the one who's advocating for you, because they're the one who's recognizing what's going on, and then they can kind of bear on their shoulders, like trying to understand what's going on with the calls, whereas you can just be focused on the fencing.
Yes, I agree with you. We have a very similar thing in our clubs. We really put an effort on the whole coaching thing. It's like if you can only just do what you're trying to do. I will also say that I really like the fact that the two fencers just get along so well that while whatever conversations have, they're just chatting with each other. Which is like, it's nice to see, right?
Right. Yeah.
I always say that the respectful thing that you can do for someone is give it your best when you're fencing, and then realize that we're all here for the same fun afterwards. It's great.
Well, HEMA, the one thing that's interesting about HEMA, and it doesn't really matter where you go, HEMA is we're very good to each other. And that's not true of all combat sports. I remember talking to. It was one year we were at, I can't remember if it was P&W or Sword Squatch, but there was a really fantastic grappler who was teaching there, and he had actually won several Nagas.
Oh, wow.
And he was amazing. And he was like former Army Ranger. He was a really cool guy. But he was saying that when he goes to Nagas to compete, the other competitors go up to him and go, I'm gonna mess you up. Like, and they not nice, like really like aggressive and being jerks to him.
I'm gonna get in your head.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just interesting that in HEMA we just really don't ever experience anything like that.
Here's the thing is like, when you think about how we came to be, is like, in order to work with the sources, we had to cooperate with each other. And I think that's split up. It's like, we don't get to understand, we will never be able to understand this activity if we're not both committed to it. And for that, I need to have like a kind of like a relationship with the other person. So if I come in as like, I'm gonna like, there's no learning opportunity there, because you need the whole picture to be able to like rebirth.
And I also think this goes back to the generation of HEMA right before us, which is you get to remember that early on, before there were tournaments, there were a lot of keyboard warriors who had very strong opinions about how things work. And eventually it just came down to, well, let's get together at this next event. Let's get our Shinai out and our fencing masks, and let's just see if things work or not.
Jake Norwood's ears are beeping right now really hard.
Right. And so there's always been kind of this let's let's just put it to the test. Let's stop going in circles talking about about this online. Let's just go and test it. And so there is a very collaborative element to what's in the spirit of what HEMA is now. It's great because we are just literally going, okay, does this work? Does this not? And there's a lot of collaboration. And fencers, one of the things that's great, what's really fascinating is, Scarlett's here. Scarlett is one of the old school fencers.
Yeah.
And I remember my instructor, the first time he met Scarlett, he lost to Scarlett in a tournament. And then afterwards, he went to Scarlett and was like, what did you do? How do I beat that? How do I stop that? And Scarlett's like, that's the first time anyone's ever asked me that before. But that's now become. I think that's now the norm. The norm now is to find people who beat you and go, "Hey, what are you doing with that thing? Show me how you're doing that. I want to stop that. I want to know how to beat that." In other combat sports, that's unheard of.
Oh yeah, they will never tell you. It's like I don't know, kid.
Yeah, I'm not going to teach you that. So that was a good match. Again, I really like they both the Claire and Piper. Nice, clean, methodical fencing. They weren't rushing in. They weren't crashing. We in the rules we made not only is buckler punching not scoring. Buckler punching is a card because we really want to discourage people from getting close enough for the crashing and smashing each other.
The way that I always talk to people is like. So there's these things in the sources, especially for example, if you're wearing armor, and one of the advice that they tell you is things like more slag or hey, with the edge of the buckler. Why do you think they tell you to do that? Might it be because it works too good? So let's not go there.
Well, it's interesting. I remember Chittister was talking a while back about the lack of evidence for buckler punching in the sources. There's that Tallhofer plate where it shows a arm cut and simultaneously the person cutting the opponent's arm is pressing their face with the buckler.
Yeah.
But there's no text. And so did he cut his arm and now he's holding him off by the shield, or did he punch him in the face and then they cut his arm? So we really don't know.
I will also argue, I know that post-COVID HEMA, and I'm sorry people for bringing this up, but post-COVID HEMA doesn't have a close relationship with ringing like we used to have. And that makes sense because COVID didn't make getting close to each other very welcoming. But when I think about sword and buckler, and when just in sources in general, if I get so close to punch you with my buckler, I'm at wrestling distance. I don't know if I want to wrestle you while I have a dish stuck to my hand and you do as well. So it just doesn't sound smart to
I agree.
try to get there.
I think, there's also other better alternatives we see in sources like envelopments and other grapples and things. This is, by the way, real quick, I don't want to cut you off, but this match right here will be very interesting.
Yeah, no.
Rochelle and Iris are both very strong, physically strong, and Rochelle and Iris are both also very experienced. They're both high-level fencers. They both gold medaled in lots of different weapon categories. So this actually could end up being a really, really good match.
I've been watching Iris fence throughout the weekend, and as a footwork fanatic, I really like the play on what she's doing right now, right? It's entering and exiting and
very
trying
buoyant.
to bait that distance, choose the right timing, and go for it, right?
Right.
Provocation, attack, things like that. Also, I am sorry to the public, and I'm probably apologize to Kyle as well, because I have to say it. I find it really funny to read Brat Lab and Noble Science. It just seems like a perfect match.
That's an excellent observation.
I'm sorry.
I actually like the fact that you brought up Iris is very buoyant. She's very light on her feet. It's almost a very interesting dichotomy there with Rochelle, she fights more like me. It's just a slow, methodical, walking you down, and then that perfect timing and measure hit.
Yes,
all right.
I can see that. Yeah.
So two kind of different fighting styles here. And Rochelle, I don't think she does a ton of sword and buckler, but I know she does quite a bit of broadsword. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that shows up here. We talked earlier about this idea of how to how the orientation of the buckler and facing. You notice, Rochelle's keeping that sort of flush with her forearm, which is very much the way that she would be doing it with a targe, right?
Yeah.
And again, you see Iris, she's just so buoyant. She's bouncing, she's testing. Look like we cut to the head, cut to the leg, probably faulted double. So
I really like also the for dabbling into the concept of like reading your opponent is that little saying of like, is this twitching the way that I want it to? Can I actually get that bait? And I really like that.
And it's interesting. There's two very different schools of thought when it comes to footwork. There is the, like when I go and when I fence Martin Fabian, or I was just at his school recently. I was fencing his guys. They're very athletic, and they're moving, and they're sort of getting in and out. And versus, when I talk to Rob Childs, who's like probably the best rapier fencer in the world, Rob Childs says that footwork is dumb. Don't ever do that footwork. He's like, his idea is like, I don't need to feint you with my feet. I'm just going to get methodically creep in until you let me stab you in the face. And it's not to say one's right and one's wrong, but it is interesting how you can have two schools of thought and have fencers both have high levels of success with that.
Listen, that's again, I love that kind of situations where it's like you have two of the top fencers in their own thing say that the opposite is not the way to go, and they both demonstrate that they both work good. It's almost as if, dear public, what works for you is what works for you.
Yeah.
I am on the bouncy end of the footwork spectrum. I like the mobility, but also I am small.
All right.
And I also know that what everyone wants, which is the top of your head at any event, is immediately available to everyone. So I choose the bounciness, right? Whereas I had like students who are like very solid on their feet, very like stable, and they're just fantastic at like timing, where they don't and timing the opponent. Oh, there you go.
So we get this Iris probing to the hand a couple times, and then she's getting Rochelle to bring the buckler down to cover the hand, and then a kind of this jumping strike to the head. No, maybe the director is disagreeing with the two judges. I don't know. I thought Rochelle may have covered it, but I
will also say sort of buckler is the hardest thing to rev of all.
Yeah, it's tough. And one of the things I tell my students all the time is you're not just fencing the other fencer, you're fencing against the judges. So what you do needs to be clear.
Yes.
If you're being messy, if you're doing things that are hard to see, then that's, you could be fencing great, but it's a game. This is what it comes down to. It's a game. This isn't the same as being in a real sword fight, right? Like there is a sort of element to this gamemanship that is important.
Sorry, I got distracted by the call. I agree with you. But yeah, I will also say that I do like the challenge that I tell my students, you learn how to fence, then you learn how to tournament, and then you learn how to tournament fence. Because they're not all the same, right?
Right.
But I do like kind of like how that, once again, to me, I see it as I can look at it as a downside, or I can see it as a good side. And so when you have like refs who understand certain actions, they're more likely to see it.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're able to find a pattern, can you adapt to different refs? So it's a good way to also push you to learn to fence in different ways.
Yeah,
I
agree with that.
It's like if I have to adapt myself, not just to my fencer, but to my judges, can I do that? Can I turn the fencing into what I need it to be in order to succeed? And in what some people might see as a failure, I see it as a room of opportunity of like, you could have stagnated into the one thing that I'm good at, versus if you're really good at that thing, but no one can see it.
Yeah, and
it helps you broaden your horizons.
It's true. Yeah, that's true. I think if kind of the sort of fencing you're inclined to do is the fencing which is difficult to see, that might encourage you to start trying to work, because like obviously the kinds of things that are the easiest to judge are cuts without opposition, which is clean hits, or thrusts where we get to see a nice lock and a bend, and we can also clearly see that the opponent's sword is not making contact. But it's interesting though that like typically, this is not always the case, but typically when we're fencing really cleanly, methodically, and decisively, we're typically going to have the kinds of exchanges which are the easiest ones to judge.
You know what we should do though? Because there's a way to solve these problems.
Yeah.
You grab a sword, whichever sword you want to do, and then you put electric current to it. You stick it through your arm, and then you make sure that your jackets are gray so it touches the beams.
That's a great idea.
Sorry, I just had to.
You should do that.
I am a troll. What y'all don't know is that I'm really enjoying the opportunity to troll Kyle. Just he cannot run away from this conversation, so I'm having a fun time.
Yes.